Let me say a prayer for us. God, thanks for tonight. Thank you for this Advent season where we learn to wait again for your coming. Thanks for being with us tonight. We ask as we uh, read and listen and talk that you'd continue to shape us into faithful disciples. We pray this in your Son's name. Amen. So, lots to do tonight, but the item I wanted to say here, because the recording starts with the prayer, um, is that this will be our last gathering for the year. We'll pick it up again in mid-January, and tonight's kind of the last uh, of the history heavy um, evenings, and then we'll kind of build on that history in the new year and start to talk about issues that confront us in the present. Um, and so, it, I mean, let's be honest, it's me. There'll always be a little bit of history in this, but uh, tonight we're going to cover kind of the post-war period, which is it's sad to limit that to one evening because that's my specialty is post-war American evangelicalism. That's where I did my doctoral research and the things that I wrote. Um, so I, I want to start with minimal background and review, but I do want to do some of that. And um, so we've been we've been talking about the goal of this class, and you know, talking about being more confident and effective in the ways that we engage the culture around us in our faith. Um, we all want to be better prepared and feel better prepared to respond knowledgeably and gently when we encounter challenges or misrepresentations of the faith. I think you've heard me say, and it's probably a good day for me to say this again. I am sick to death of people who call themselves Christians and who act like anything other than uh, Jesus, or even a pale reflection of Jesus, or even people who call themselves Christians and do things that are exactly the opposite of what Jesus taught. And too much of that going around. Just in case you were wondering about how to engage the most recent outrages, let me just tell you this: no one created in the image of God is ever garbage. Just wanted to offer you that one theological nugget before we get started tonight. People who watch this tape, if everybody watches it next year, they're going to wonder why I said that, but they can look at their newspapers. Um, uh, I want us all to feel better prepared, to be knowledgeable and to be gentle, but to be effective and to feel confident in that effectiveness. And I think it's important because there's big issues in the culture that people are looking, where people of faith are looking for answers. And sometimes those answers are found in the Bible. Literally, there is a biblical response to someone referring to a whole group of human beings as garbage. It is the creation story. God creates the world, creates the way the creation story comes to us. It's not so much the how of the story, it's the who. And the fact that God says at the end of the creation story, and especially about humans, and it was very good. It was good. It was good. It was good. And then with humans, it was very good. That alone on the first page of the Bible refutes referring to any human being or group of human beings as garbage. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. We're going to talk more about it. We're going to get a little bumpy after the first of the year, but I wanted to say, and what we've been talking about is how we got to the state that we're in, and some of that division between people of faith and the wider culture does really hit um, a high point or a low point in and around the Scopes trial. And so that's why we talked about that for so much. And the Scopes trial, as we've said, was one guy being put on trial for teaching evolution in a public school. but the real impact of it was the press coverage of the trial, which painted Christians as imbeciles and backwards, retrogressive, whatever word you want to put on there, dumb people. You can go long, you can go multisyllabic, and you can go monosyllabic in this. But it was not a positive um, reflection of who Christians were at that time, and some of them were resistant to knowledge. But it's funny that the person who was at the forefront of this was an exceptionally well educated Christian person, William Jennings Bryan. He was the Democratic candidate for president 3 times. He was Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson. This is not a bumpkin, and yet that's how he was portrayed by the press after the trial. Um, and so society responded in the aftermath of the trial, and most of them just kind of absorbed that negative image of people of faith. Um, and this is people of traditionalist faith, and we're going to talk a little bit about that division, because pretty much the rest of society went on with its business in the 20s and 30s. Yeah, the roaring 20s, and then you have the depression in the 30s. Yeah, World War II in the 40s, and pretty soon you're 20 years after the trial, and nobody's really talking about it except for the people that took the trial on the chin, which was traditionalist Christians. And so Christians responded by starting to separate from the wider culture. And this is, I want to be clear about this. Even Christianity was divided between traditionalists and modernists. And modernists were people who we would call ourselves modernists here. We may have varying degrees of disagreement on certain doctrines, but for the most part, those of us who are a part of this church, we're Christian people. We struggle sometimes, but our goal and our objective is to live out the words of Jesus, and to wrestle with what our creeds say. But we also, for the most part, I think, recognize that there are scientific explanations for things that don't appear in the Bible. That would make us modernists in this debate. The traditionalists are just that. They held on to the tradition that the Bible was the answer for everything, instead of just being the answer for the things that it says it's the answer for. And so those groups, even within Christianity, separated from each other. But I want to focus, and our focus really has been on the evangelical side, the traditionalist side. After the trial, traditionalists separated themselves from anything that didn't conform to their narrow understanding of Christianity and the Bible. They separated from public institutions, from schools, from universities, from academic societies, even from government. I did say that from the time of the 20s up to 1980, you were far more likely to see an American flag in a mainline moderate modernist church than you were in an evangelical church. They separated from the wider culture. That's going to change by the end of our account tonight, but that's kind of, between 1925 and 1980, that's largely, if you walked into a mainline church, you would see a flag up in front. But you probably wouldn't see one in an evangelical church. And so the humiliation of the Scopes trial led these traditionalist, separatist Christians to kind of create a little society within a society, to separate both from modernist Christians and also from secular culture. I grew up in a little wing of that. It kind of straddled the line. I grew up in a moderate Evangelical Presbyterian Church in Burbank. Um, but we had a youth leader that sent us to a seminar that told us the evils of rock and roll. So they were clearly they were barking up the wrong tree with me. But but so and that's in what 1980 or so. That was still a part of church culture even then. But that society within a society um, really stuck, and in that separated sense, that group of traditionalist Christians took it upon themselves to preserve their understanding of what it meant to be American. Now, I'm not one that automatically brands movements as racist. And I don't think that evangelical separatist Christianity ever really saw itself as racist, except for in places in the South where racism was a part of the culture, whether they were Christian or not. That's a different thing. But what ended up happening is that their understanding of what it meant to be American was to be Christian and to be white. And this is a strain during this time after the Scopes trial that continues to today. And we're going to talk a little bit later about why that's so damaging and how that has become so dangerous in our culture. Um, but while they were separated, they started all of these organizations where they could work and sort of work together. So they started their own schools, they started their own colleges, they took over Bible colleges that already existed and made them more conservative. That's happening now too. Places like Wheaton that were clearly in the evangelical camp since their founding uh, have become more conservative in the Trump era because the lines have gotten harder and sharper. But one uh, by the end of the 1930s, so it didn't take long, end of the 1930s, we're talking about 14 or 15 years after the Scopes trial. Some fundamentalists realized that being separate from the culture, A, limited their opportunities for advancement either in a career or in education or in all of these other areas, but it was anti-evangelistic. You couldn't really be a witness for Christ among the people who needed to hear it and see it if you were separated from them. If you weren't going out and participating in things, you couldn't be a model of who Jesus is in these communities and organizations. And so, my focus, what I know best, is the academic intellectual side. What I wrote about was a kind of a rehabilitation of evangelical scholarly life in the years after World War II. But it's true across a wide range of things. And I talked a little bit about Youth for Christ and World Vision. These were all started during this period and were ways for evangelicals who didn't want to be separated from the rest of society to engage society. Youth for Christ was clearly an evangelism movement. Uh, there was a concern in the wider culture after World War II about a new term called juvenile delinquency. And newspapers were concerned about it. Editorials were written about youth culture and its danger to American society. When Billy Graham came on the scene, William Randolph Hearst gave out an order, a two-word order to all of his newspapers, Puff Graham. It basically meant build him up in the newspapers because he was having a positive impact on youth culture at the time. And by the late 40s, Billy Graham is already attracting tens of thousands of young people to come and hear him speak. And so there are these organizations, kind of this society within a society, and but some wanted to rejoin the wider society. And out of this generation of separatism, some evangelicals wanted to start a new trend toward cooperation, working together for a common cause, even if theologies might be different. And like I said, a lot of this included intellectual life, or what we'll call like the life of the mind, is what we say. The people who write the textbooks that other people study so that they can get on with their life. Um, Fuller Seminary became the evangelical center of this new, more open evangelical movement. They hired faculty from major universities. The first handful of faculty went to Harvard, Boston University, NYU. There ended up being a handful of faculty members from Harvard, and they were young fundamentalist men who had grown up being recognized for being bright and realizing that there's a whole wide world of culture out there that they wanted to engage in faith, just the whole thing that we're talking about in this class. And so a handful of them ended up at Harvard during the war years. And um, they became the next generation of evangelical leaders in America in the 40s and 50s. They founded things like Christianity Today magazine, which is still out there and publishing. They were deeply involved in the faculty at Fuller. Um, they really raised the next generation of traditionalist Christian scholars who wanted to engage the wider intellectual world. And that may sound like, well, that's such a narrow group, but they had such an influence on the Christian culture during the 40s and 50s and 60s. The guy that I wrote about, George Ladd, I'm going to read a little bit from a paper that I wrote about him. Um, the he would publish a book, I mean, a fairly serious book about doctrine, about a Christian doctrine. And then I had in my possession, when I was writing the book, folders and folders of personal correspondence with readers, just church members, people who read his book and said, I have a question about this, and he would answer it. It was like a little town hall meeting every time he published a book. And so the influence wasn't just on this narrow ivory tower intellectual life. It was they were doing this hard work, and it was changing the way Christians lived their Christian life. It's a hugely important era in American church history. And so Fuller Seminary is a big part of that. That those young scholars that went to Harvard, uh, they wanted to write books that non-evangelicals read. If you read my book, part of the one tragic part of George Ladd's story is that he wrote this book that he thought would change the way not just evangelicals but the wider Christian scholarly world would think about a certain topic, and it got a terrible review in one journal, and it broke it. After a lifetime of work, he was really a broken man for the remaining years of his life because of this bad review. Um, but what I want you to hear from that is this the idea that they were trying to engage the culture in their faith, that was a renewed sense of purpose for them after the years of fundamentalist separation from the culture. And so, and that does bring us back to the two big questions that are guiding this class. How do we know what we know? And how does that shape the way we engage the world around us? And also, how can we be more confident and effective in the ways that we engage the culture in our faith? And that lets me talk a little bit about George Ladd tonight. I think I talked about him just a bit last week. He's raised in a fundamentalist Baptist tradition. but he wanted to prove that traditional Christian theology could produce scholarship that matched up with the wider academic world. So he gets a PhD at Harvard, and he's a professor at Fuller for about almost 30 years, starting in 1950. Um, all of this is important because it represents an attempt from these young traditionalists, they're on the conservative side of things, to engage the world outside their own cocoon. I think I talked last week about Billy Graham, that evangelicalism really split over Billy Graham, and the people who went with Billy Graham and his crusades that included Presbyterians and Methodists and Episcopalians, um, those became the evangelicals. And the people who separated from Billy Graham because they didn't think he should participate with Methodists and Presbyterians and Episcopals, they became the fundamentalists. So that definition starts to change in that year. 1957 is a massive year for this part of the history because this is when evangelicalism blows up. So I was going to read a part of this paper, but I think I'm gonna skip that for time because I want to get to this part of what we're talking about. Ladd, in a speech that he gave in 1959, um, addressed a seminary, a Baptist seminary, saying that we've messed up. We've separated from people. We have these massive arguments over small doctrinal issues, and um, and the outside world thinks we're stupid. Uh, we keep splitting, so we've we keep chopping up our power, our potential for growth and impact on the culture. And he really lays into them. That's the part I was going to read tonight. Um, but not enough people listen to Ladd and other people like him. You have this group of both fundamentalists and evangelicals who aren't connected enough to the culture, and that goes on for a while. They're still arguing, though, still arguing about doctrinal issues like when the end times will be, or who's the Antichrist. They're lost in these little details, but they're arguing about the Bible, they're arguing about theology. All of that changes in the late 70s, and primarily, if you want an important year that's a marker, 1980. And this is when Jerry Falwell explodes onto the scene with the moral majority. Here's why Falwell represents such an important shift. Up until 1980, so the years from 1925, the Scopes trial, to 1980, evangelicals and fundamentalists focused on the Bible and theology. Now, some of them did it in their own little world and only associated with people who agreed with them. And others of them focused on theology and engaged the wider culture. But it was theology and the Bible that mattered to them. Falwell put together the moral majority based around four social issues. And the issues in 1980 that gathered thousands of people to participate into the moral majority, and that lead to the victory of Ronald Reagan over a self-professed evangelical, Jimmy Carter. And the four social issues were school prayer, abortion, homosexuality, and support for Israel. Now, in those four issues, there's nothing central to Christian doctrine. What came to define the moral majority and its movement was where you stood on these four issues, not what you believed about who Jesus is. I cannot overstate the importance of what I just said. The defining who is and who is not Christian by where they stand on those four social issues, that changed everything for Christianity in America. Certainly on the tradition, on the evangelical fundamentalist side. That's 1980. 45 years later, right? This year, we've now got basically two generations of evangelicals who have been raised to define Christianity by where they stand on these four issues and not on the Bible and theology. It's a massive shift, and it has, for the most part, destroyed evangelical Christianity. So much so that biblical passages and teachings from the direct words of Jesus are being perceived as liberal or woke or somehow un-American. Uh, I, I, I mean, the garbage comment that came out this week is a prime example of that. No, I don't care what kind of fire-breathing conservative was rolling around in the 1950s. They may have had a lot to say about communists, but they never would have said that. They never would have referred to an entire ethnic group as garbage. The only way you can get away with that is if your listeners aren't steeped enough in the teachings of Jesus to recognize that that was an evil thing to say. And so you have a handful, you have a generation and a half, or maybe two generations of Americans who refer to themselves, who identify themselves as Christian, but they identify themselves as Christian based on what they think about these issues. You could never be, in their eyes, a pro-choice Christian. You could never be a Christian person who welcomed gay people fully into the life of your church. If you don't, if you, and you just, over the last 2 or 3 years, I hope you've noticed this, and this is the explanation for why it was so awful. If you criticize Israel, no matter what Israel does, you can't be considered Christian. And more than that, since when they were separated from the culture, when they took it upon themselves to define what it meant to be American, if you're any of these things, then you're anti-American too. I hope pennies are dropping all over the place based on what we've seen in the news over the last couple of years with Israel and Gaza, let's say. The people who criticized Israel have been called un-American. I don't know why it's un-American to say that one of our partners in the world is abusing its neighbors. But if your definition of Christian includes full, unflinching, unwavering support for the political state of Israel, then that's how that happens. For people who like our church, which is welcoming to all kinds of people, we welcome into not just membership but leadership. One of my dear friends in the Presbyterian Church is a married gay man who is also a Presbyterian pastor. That's why they look at us and think we can't be Christian or American if we think that's okay. Because those have come to be the defining issues that say whether you're in or out of the Christian faith. And the emphasis on the social issues and not on Bible and theology means no one can really argue with them. I have a very difficult time going to some members of my family and saying, here's why I think what is happening right now is wrong. And they say, but don't you like America? Well, yeah, I like America fine. And Truth be told, I come from a Gold Star family. Some of you know what that is. I've got a relative that died in armed conflict. But uh, but because I think the way that I think, they've decided not only am I not a good Christian, I'm not a good American. And so 2 generations now of evangelicals have focused more on these social issues than they have on Bible and theology. And so when you bring Bible and theology and the person and the actual teachings of Jesus into the conversation, they're unfamiliar. I think I said in a sermon here not long ago that Russell Moore, who um, is a Southern Baptist Christian, uh, conservative politically, conservative socially. He's getting letters from Southern Baptist pastors who are preaching through the Sermon on the Mount and being criticized by their church members. One of them just read the Sermon on the Mount as part of his sermon. And at the end, a church member came up to him and said, I don't know why you're talking about all that woke nonsense. Those are the red letter words of Jesus for those of you who have red letter Bibles like I do. You know, the words of Jesus are printed in red in my Bible. And it's because the actual teachings of the Bible are subordinated to what you think about those 4 social issues. That's the lasting impact of the moral majority. And it matters for what we're doing in this class because we're talking about how do we engage the culture with our faith? Because I would argue poor choices have been made about how to engage the culture with through faith over the last 45 or 50 years. When Christianity came to be defined by a handful of social issues and not the teachings of Jesus, we went off the rails, or parts of us went off the rails. And we continue to live under the impact of that. This accounts for something that can call itself Christian nationalism, which is really just nationalism with people who have a misguided understanding of what it means to be Christian leading it. And so, if you're a nationalist, in other words, a nationalist, somebody who thinks your country, your kind of people are better than everyone else, and everyone else really can go to hell. Um, if that's what you think, but you also call yourself a Christian, but a Christian who's defined by these 4 social issues and not the Bible, that's how you get to a Christian nationalism that's not recognizable to other Christians. I've got friends from high school sending me private messages going, "Is this what you teach? I'm hearing I'm hearing this Christian nationalism in the news and I'm reading it and it sounds awful to me. Is that what you teach?" And I have to go through this whole explanation. But this is how we got to the state we're in. The evangelical movement, which was a dominant positive impact, positive influence on American culture in the 1800s, shifted by the end of the 1900s to become a basically a militant, largely white nationalist organization or coalition of groups that that's defined more by what it thinks about school prayer is code for, you know, I'm allowed to have public expressions of my Christian faith, but you can't be Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or Sikh, right? It's the people who get on the news every freaking December and say you can't say Merry Christmas anymore. Bull. You can say Merry Christmas as much as you want, but you can also say Happy Holidays and include the rest of the country. Uh, so school prayer is code for uh, how privileged a position Christianity has within the culture. And then the other ones, these are the things that have divided our society, divided our families, divided our denomination over the last 50 years: abortion, homosexuality, and support for Israel. And so when a religion that was meant to be built on the teachings of its founder becomes defined by social issues which are divisive within a culture, that religion is in peril. And so it's my unhappy job every time I get a chance to say that traditionalist Christianity, which I would still consider myself to be a part of, traditionalist Christianity is in danger of destroying itself. And so somebody like the current president, who doesn't have a religious tradition of his own, knows that he is only electable if he bends to the wishes of the people who consider themselves Christian because they have the same views about abortion, homosexuality, and support for Israel. And so, it does us no good to wake up in 2025 and say, how did we get here? We got here because of a thing. And if we got here because of a thing, we can fix it because of a thing or through a thing. In other words, we got here for reasons and we can fix it with reasons. And my hope is that as we continue this discussion into the new year, that we talk about ways we can. I think we're still going to have to, talk a little bit about evangelical Christianity now and Christian nationalism now, in order for us to develop our own ways to engage that and engage it without losing the command to love one another, even our enemies, but also to stand for something and to stand for the right thing. And so I want to leave us some time for conversation, but that's what I have for us for tonight. So let me. I spared you reading a page from an old paper. Let me invite you all to unmute. If you've got noise in the background, just keep yourself muted till you want to make a comment. But does that help shape how you understand what's going on now through this kind of this sprint through the last 50 years? Yeah, Larry, please.
Well, yeah, it does, but it doesn't seem to explain how does a Christian nationalist justify ignoring his red Bible?
Yeah, well, I think they've been taught that the issues were more important than the Bible. That's my point, is that two generations of them have been taught. Like, you can go to a youth event on the very conservative evangelical side, and they'll talk about these issues with some nod to Christianity, and it's the issue. Like, I know of people who have been to youth events where all they did was talk about the evils of homosexuality and then said amen at the end. And so you've got generations of people who think that's what it means to be Christian. And so it's not that they're rejecting the red letters. They've never seen the red letters.
Okay. Well, that's an explanation.
Yeah, Dale, please.
How has the predominantly black church either bought into or avoided buying into all this four doctrines and Christian nationalism, all that?
Yeah. So black Christian culture, which is not a monolith. So these are answers for a Thursday night, but these would never pass muster in a book or in a journal article. But they avoided it partly because they were never invited into it. The guy that I wrote about, George Ladd, was a member of the First Presbyterian Church of Pasadena while he was, I'm sorry, First Baptist Church of Pasadena while he was a professor at Fuller. He resigned his membership at the church when a black teenager came to faith through their youth program, and the church would not accept him to membership. And Ladd said, "Nope, that's not just bad Christian faith, that's bad Baptist faith. That a baptized member, a baptized Christian is automatically a member of the church, but they denied this young black man membership in the church." And so, for the most part, black Christian culture wasn't invited into the mainstream of American evangelicalism. And there is a book that talks about the different ways that black Christians read the same texts that white Christians do. And here is the example. The Exodus story in the 1800s, white evangelicals read the Exodus story as the explanation for how all of these Christians came from Europe and were released to the promised land of America. On the same plantation, black Christians who were allowed, when they were allowed to have their own worshiping communities, black Christians saw the Exodus story as a story of hope that they might be released from slavery. Same Bible, two different interpretations of the story. And so there's a whole list of examples of these parallel interpretations or readings of Bible stories that, I learned, I read the Pilgrim's History when Winthrop on the Mayflower writes this statement that we will be a city on a hill. We are the ones, we're leaving bondage to freedom, and we're gonna be a Christian witness to the world. Nobody asked the slaves on the boat, or the slaves they were about to have a generation or two down the line. And so, same Bible, two different experiences and readings of those popular stories. But the Exodus story is the best example. Literally on the same plantation. The plantation owner and his family can thank God that they got to come to the promised land and thrive. And the black slaves on the same plantation would be hoping to be released from slavery, reading the same story. They didn't get their promised land yet. Sorry, Smiths. I see Smiths. Yeah, okay.
I was just going to say, in the American Revolution series that has just aired, they were saying that there was a special Bible that the plantation owners used with the slaves where they didn't even include the Exodus story for that very reason.
Yeah, there's some did. Yeah, some did that. The guy that wrote the book about this is he wrote a book called The Civil War as a Theological Crisis. It's Mark Noll, Noll, and anything you read by him will be good to great. Full disclosure, he was my external examiner for my dissertation, and he was just at this conference I went to in Chicago. Mark wrote, he's the one that wrote a whole chapter, I think, on that story of Exodus and how it was read by the two different communities, literally on the same piece of property. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the heavily edited Bible is part of the story too. Yeah, you just take out the parts that that you take out Galatians because every other word is freedom. Yeah, Tim,
My turn. My turn.
go for it. I see your paper.
Okay. I've been taking notes, John.
Oh boy.
So the four social issues you were talking about, one with the issue of homosexuality, and we've already, church has gone through that separation with the echo issue. But wouldn't you think that the latest social issue, latest, but I mean, one would be immigration, which we're going through this division now with white nationalists saying, push them out, and people are trying to help and stop that.
Yeah, I think so. And here's what I think, where I think people can have a principled conversation about the issue of reproduction. I think there can be a principled debate, not the debate we've heard over the last 50 years, but I think there can be a conversation about attitudes towards life that are gentle to both sides and that recognize that this is a complicated question. I don't think we're ever going to get to a principled conversation about hating an ethnic group. In other words, I think immigration, and now we're doing journalism and not real historical analysis, right? Because this is happening right now.
Yeah.
But it looks to me like the hardcore Christian nationalists will be exposed for their lack of Christian charity in the ways that they talk about immigrants. That this might finally be the issue that you're even seeing some divisions there now. The story last week about Tucker Carlson having this pro-Nazi racist Yahoo, and the Heritage Foundation would not criticize him, wouldn't denounce it. And so now you're seeing cracks in this. Well, wait a second. It's one thing, and this is not me saying what I'm about to say.
No.
This is somebody, I'm putting these words in somebody. It's one thing to think that homosexuality is wrong. It's quite another to say that immigrants are garbage. And I think that is going to end up, this is my just prediction, and I've been wrong on almost everything for the last 15 years. I think the hatred of human beings in general will end up being what cracks the Christian from the nationalist in Christian nationalism. Because even now there are people saying, wait a second, even full-throated supporters of the current president are saying things like, but you can't say that. We don't think that. We don't all think that way. And so I see that as a hopeful sign. You even what I call keychain Christianity, right? Keychain Christianity is love your neighbor, the little things, the golden rule, all the little things that we can say in 3 or 4 words that end up on bumper stickers or keychains and things. This is going against even that. And people who never read their Bible in a serious way at least know the love your neighbor passage. And so I think you're onto something. That immigration, I think I'm hoping, and it's going to come at a cost, but I'm hoping immigration is going to end up being what splits the MAGA movement from its Christian constituencies. Because remember, a lot of people who are in the MAGA movement and supporting they don't have any faith tradition at all. They're just secular American. Now they think that being American means being Christian, which is why they don't like the other very much, right? And so, yeah. Anyway, I think you're onto something with immigration being a marker issue that might change things. Yeah, Larry.
I just want to insert an engineer's interpretation of a crack. Cracks start small, but they grow, and eventually is what causes the cave to collapse.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for, at least in the way that I'm using the crack as a metaphor. Because, for example, what split evangelicalism in 1957 was this question about who you participate with. Can a fundamentalist participate in an evangelistic event with Billy Graham as its speaker if there are Methodists there, or Presbyterians, or Episcopalians, or God forbid, Catholics? Because Catholics not only bear the mark of the whole Pope and the hierarchy, but Catholics in America represent immigration. It's the Irish, the Italians, other Eastern Europe, Poles. They're the Catholics, right? You got huge Catholic Polish community in Chicago that's rooted in that community. You've got Irish and Italian Catholics in New York, who one after another controlled both legal and illegal things. To say Catholic is also to bring in the immigration question, more so than Episcopalians. Nobody really cares that Presbyterians were Scottish because they were white. And Episcopalians being English, and the Methodists also being a split off from the Church of England. Nobody cares about them, but the Catholics represent the brown people.
Anything other than Northern Europeans, right?
Yeah, I mean it's a little bit of an anomaly in Chicago because the foundational Catholic community in Chicago is Polish. But in the rest of the upper Midwest, it's Lutheran, and it's Lutheran from Sweden, from Germany, from Norway. The Scandinavian Lutherans own the upper Midwest.
Yes, they do.
And alongside the Dutch Reformed in Michigan.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, John?
Yeah, please.
So you were saying that now, generally, that there's two generations that have grown up under this new evangelical four-question Christianity. So at what point? I mean, so two generations. I mean, the big exile, right? That went on for 50 years. I mean, that's two generations, maybe three. I mean, so at what point does it simply does it take over as the main thing, having been there for two generations? I mean,
well, I think it has taken over. I think we're in an era where the conservative side of evangelicalism has been taken over by the impact and influence of Jerry Falwell and the four social issues. What makes Christianity different is that it has a source document that predates all of that. And as people return to the source document, they realize that it's Jesus that is the focus and the definition of the faith, and not these issues. That you can still have a point of view on those issues, but they aren't what define you as a Christian. And so, that's getting back to Larry's crack theory. That I think the crack, the space that will be created between people who are really seeking Jesus but never really introduced to him, and people who don't really care about Jesus, they just want power. The crack between them will be a rediscovery of the teachings of Jesus. And on that, the internet might finally live up to its promise, because there's an awful lot of good, corrective Bible teaching and Bible-based criticism that's out there. And it's not all shrill, it's not all attacks. And in some places, it's getting through. Now, I'm an eternal optimist. I think literally I'm supposed to be an eternal optimist. But I think I think that as people get reacquainted or acquainted for the first time with the actual teachings of Jesus, uh, that they will sort of filter some of the things that are not Christ-like from their understanding of what it means to be a Christian. That's my hope. That's why we're doing this class. That's why I read the things that I read and support the organizations that I support. There are people out there that are trying to do exactly that, and say that if we're gonna call ourselves by a name that has Christ in it, we might as well know what Christ said.
Hmm.
Karen, you used the raised hand thing.
I did.
Karen, please.
Well, you're mainly talking about Protestantism in the U.S., right? Because there's Catholics all over the world, and I don't know if they're going along with these things. Maybe the abortion.
Oh, no. I wasn't lumping Catholics in there. I was talking about the different groups that are here in America. So, no.
Well, like what Margot said, because I mean, there's people all around the world that are going to keep this going. South Korea.
Yeah. Well, one of the challenges right now in global Catholicism is that the Catholicism, which is growing by millions in the Southern Hemisphere, is far more theologically conservative than the Catholicism of the developed world. And so when they get together to vote on their pope or to vote on changes to church doctrine, there's often a conflict between North and South, the global North and South. And that's very true in the Episcopalian Church, in the Church of England. I'm sorry, it's the Anglican Communion. The Anglicans in Africa, who have massive, massive churches, are often in conflict with the more socially progressive Anglicans in the Northern Hemisphere, and that's a little bit of a problem for those big churches. But the difference, we got to go because it's 8. But when I was in London, because I was the pastor of the American church, I got invited to do a lot of things that were way over my head. One of them, I got to come and speak to a gathering of lords and members of parliament who wanted to understand from a Christian point of view what the election of Barack Obama meant. And what I noticed when I got there, and what I learned by meeting some of these folks, they were almost all on the political left. The evangelicals in Britain are on the political left because they came at the faith through the state church, but they came at it through the teachings of Jesus. And there were very few from the Conservative Party, which to us, the Conservative Party in Britain is really a moderate Republican Party here, just so you know. Not all these things mean the same thing. But I was surprised that a gathering of parliamentary Christians, so people who walked around identifying themselves as Christian, they were almost all from the Labour Party or the Liberal Democrat Party. And I didn't know that until I went and met them. So it's taken over conservative politics in this country, but it kind of influences liberal politics more in the UK. I hope that's interesting. It means a lot to me because this is why I'm doing what I'm doing at this stage of my life. I get to take the peculiar things that I've been studying for 30 years and put them into ministry. Not every nerd that does a PhD gets to do that, and I know I'm lucky. I told somebody the other day I wrote a PhD about American evangelicalism, and that suddenly makes me interesting. So, so I'm gonna enjoy my moment of being suddenly interesting, and we're gonna take this into the new year, starting somewhere around mid-January or so. For now, uh, enjoy this Advent season. I hope this season is a blessing to you. Um, I hope you take advantage of this opportunity to remember how to wait for something, because that's what this season is about. And for those of you who I get to see on a regular basis, I will see you Sunday. Let me close us in prayer. God, thank you for what you have done for us and continue to do in and through us through your Son Jesus Christ. In a culture that has misunderstood that, I pray that each one of us would take seriously being a better, clearer reflection of who Jesus actually was and is, in the places that we go and in the places where we have whatever influence we have. So be with us as we move through this Advent season, where we get to celebrate the coming of the baby Jesus again, and also hope for the coming of Christ another time. Be with us as we celebrate Advent and Christmas and into the new year. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.